So, second part of Barbenheimer weekend has to be Oppenheimer. And Oppenheimer is obviously Christopher Nolan back with a biopic of the inventor of the atomic era, Robert Oppenheimer, whose left-wing views constantly caught him at odds on a security basis with the US government. Here's a clip.
Build a town, build it fast. If we don't let scientists bring their families, we'll never get the best.
Why would we go to the middle of nowhere for who knows how long?
Why? Why? How about because this is the most important thing to ever happen in the history of the world?
Let me start with this one by saying I thought it was absolutely fabulous movie. I absolutely loved this, as indeed the illustrious Mrs. Movie Man did. I thought it was just top-notch Christopher Nolan storytelling. I thought the whole device, the way that it went from, curiously, the colour in the past, as it were, to the black and white in the future, the fission bit and the fusion bit, I just thought was just so brilliantly done. With one caveat, I thought the sound design was superb. The use of sound, I mean, I don't know what the volume level is in your cinema, but I think it's a contractual obligation for Christopher Nolan on the cinemas to turn the sound up to 12 on the dial, because my seat was physically shaking at some of the subwoofer sounds coming out of the cinema speakers. It was extraordinary. My one caveat on that is the same problem I had with Tenet, in that you can't understand a feckin' word they're saying at times. Thanks to Ludwig Göransson's music blaring out and the sound effects blaring out, a lot of the dialogue needed subtitles in order to actually hear it. And Christopher Nolan was co-writer of a lot of that dialogue. Why doesn't he want you to hear it? It's so frustrating that I found that with Christopher Nolan films in general. I think Dunkirk was much the same as well. If they still had two sound categories in the Oscars, I think for sound editing and sound in general, I think this should win the Oscar. But because sound mixing is now plugged into that mix and there's a single sound Oscar, I wouldn't give it to him on that basis. I mean, he might get it anyway because the sound is extraordinary, but that was the one thing that I didn't like. I guess another minor thing I didn't like, again, is Christopher Nolan's lack of use of VFX. And I thought it was very good, and I thought a lot the nuclear explosion bit, the Trinity test, was very well done, but I just felt it could have been better done with a bit more special effects in there than trying to use practical effects to do it. But that's just my, again, a Dunkirk hangover that I have about Nolan. Andy, what did you think of Oppenheimer?
I mean, I really, really enjoyed it. But I'll be honest, I thought this was 2/3 of a great movie, which made it a good movie, because I thought it was slightly too long. You really do have to concentrate because of the non-linear way in which the story is told. So whether it's me getting old at 60 and finding concentration for 3 hours something hard to sustain, particularly when you, as you say, Bob, the dialogue, of which there is an awful lot, isn't always that audible. I thought that it was slightly too long. I thought it did tail off a little bit towards the end. The good doctor, Mark Kermode, said this is a really, really, really good movie, but not a great one. I'm with him on that. It's interesting. You talk about the special effects. Isn't it interesting that in the East, in China and others, they've actually put a bit of CGI in there to cover over the naked lady that we see.
Oh, okay.
That's probably the best bit. That's probably the best bit of CGI in the whole film now, because that's offensive, obviously, in some cultures. Now, I thought it was a really, really, really good bit. I was fascinated by the subject, really fascinated, but it was for me a little bit too long. You didn't dare leave your seat to go to the loo because you knew.
I would have welcomed an intermission, I have to say.
I think this film could have stood an intermission. I really do. I mean, the last intermission I remember is Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, which I saw it with an intermission. It's the last one I can remember. So yeah, I loved it. I thought it was I think it's an important film because it really shows us perhaps, where we are today and where we've come from and all the rest of it. And I thought if he doesn't win the Oscar for Best Actor, then nobody will.
What, Cillian Murphy? Well, we've not had Leo DiCaprio yet.
Well, we haven't, but let's wait and see.
Scott.
Yep, so I saw this one also on the same day as Barbie, but I saw this one actually first thing in the morning, which I thought was a brave thing to do, but yeah, I did it anyway. So this one, for me, I thought, similar to Andy, I thought it was a very good film, but I didn't completely love it. I think it was a very interesting story about a person who I knew the name of, but I didn't really know much about him before this film. I thought that Göransson's score was fantastic. I loved the actual music itself throughout the whole film. As you say, not being able to hear some of that dialogue was so frustrating. And I've had some people on the internet sort of shouting me down for that, saying that there was nothing wrong with the sound, and maybe their cinemas were just set up differently, but I definitely had those problems where I couldn't hear all of the dialogue. I thought the cinematography by Hoyt van Hoytema was tremendous. I didn't completely love the whole colour black and white back and forth thing all the time, but I understood why he did it. The acting performances, yeah, Cillian Murphy, arguably a career best performance, particularly in the world of movies. He might have competition. We haven't seen Bradley Cooper yet for Maestro and Joaquin Phoenix and Napoleon. There's some big hitters in there to come as well. But he's definitely got a good chance of a nomination at least. I think the sound design itself, particularly around the Trinity scene, and more specifically the lack of sound in that scene in particular, I thought was one of the best things Nolan's ever done in his career. I thought it was a very brave thing to contrast something that should be very loud and have it in Oppenheimer's head, so much quietness and reflection and, let's be honest, guilt about what has happened. I thought that was very powerful. I loved that scene so much. So for me, although it does have some flaws that are typical of recent Nolan films, I think this is one that we're going to see a lot in awards season, and I was very impressed by it.
Yeah. Okay. Emma, anything to add?
Well, I have, every time someone asks me what I thought of it, I have been upfront saying I really have an issue with Christopher Nolan films. So, love the trilogy. The recent ones, I hated Tenet, mainly because of the sound. I didn't like Dunkirk because of the timeline, the way that ran together. Oppenheimer, I think probably one of the better ones I've had to watch of his recently. Now, actually, I didn't have an issue with the audio covering the dialogue, which obviously was a massive problem in Tenet. Cillian Murphy was very quiet, but actually I found that okay. I honestly didn't notice the difference, and this sounds stupid. I know we have black and white and colour. I did not notice the difference. Like, apart from the very first time it came up, it just all blended into one for me. It was really weird. As everyone says, you know, great story, very interesting, like to see that process and, you know, just what everyone was going through, but could easily have cut some time off. I felt it was too long. There was one point in the middle where I was just like checking my watch, you know, when's Barbie coming? But I found the audio much better in this than Tenet. The music was wonderful, you know, really great, really worked. I didn't notice it all the way through, but there were certain points where the music came so overwhelming, it distracted me from what was happening. It seemed to coincide with quiet a bit, so you think, oh, there's building tension and whatnot, but actually it became so obtrusive that I was just like, no, he's doing it again. That started to frustrate me a bit, but the acting, again, as everyone said, absolutely fantastic. But I think we're getting to the point, it's a bit like Fast and Furious. You've got so many different big names in it that some of the really good actors are just getting underused. I thought Emily Blunt was fantastic, particularly in her interview scene. Towards the end.
At the end, she got given more to do.
Yeah.
And Rami Malek as well wasn't used until the end, and then he had a fantastic scene at the end. But they were almost cameos, weren't they?
Yeah, that was particularly frustrating because obviously, if you see someone big like that pop up and they do nothing, and you're like, well, what am I waiting for? Like, there's going to be something to come, and because I don't know who he was in the story, how accurate that was. I'm not familiar with it, so I didn't know what was coming. Yeah. But that just sat in my mind, like, knowing he had just thrown a bunch of papers around, and that was it.
Yeah. Yeah, but there were lots of really great cameos, weren't there? Like Gary Oldman's cameo as the president,
and I
thought was fabulous.
Didn't realise that was him.
Yeah. I didn't actually realise a name we haven't mentioned yet is Robert Downey Jr., who, again, I did not recognise as Robert Downey Jr., even though I've seen that trailer 87 times over the last 6 months. I didn't recognise him as Robert Downey Jr., even 10 minutes into the film, until one particular scene and one particular look. He just disappeared into that character. I thought a Best Supporting Actor nom for him for that is almost assured, I thought. But really great cameos throughout the film, like Tom Conti as Einstein.
I wasn't completely convinced by his makeup. I've got to be honest, by his hair.
No, it felt a little
on his head. If I'm honest,
it felt a little bit Christopher Lloyd Back to the Future to me.
Matthias Schweighöfer
as I think he played Heisenberg, but I'm a little uncertain about that.
Yeah,
joke there for the physicists. And lots of different great cameo performances kept popping up through it. I thought it was really good. As I wrote in my review, I've actually got a little bit of a family personal tie to this, because my dad was in the RAF during World War II, stationed out in the Far East, and he was actually stationed just outside Hiroshima a few months after the explosion. So he used to fly over Hiroshima to do the kind of photography for the reconstruction of the city, and some of the stuff that he saw there I've kind of put into my film review on One Man's Movies, just as a little box that came out of his book that he wrote about his life. I mean, a fascinating subject. Was it right? Was it wrong? Did it save lives by ending the war quicker? How guilty was Oppenheimer for it when Truman kind of stood up and said, well, it wasn't you, it was me that pressed the button, as it were. Did they need to do Nagasaki as well as Hiroshima? I mean, all sorts of questions that I've had for years and years about the subject kind of came into my head. I just thought it was a terrific piece of filmmaking.
Can I ask you guys as well, that last hour of the film itself, when it sort of goes into a different movie, do you guys think that they could have just taken that, separated it, and made a separate movie out of that, an actual courtroom drama movie just with that subject matter as well? Because I thought that part of the movie dragged a little.
I said in my review the last 45 minutes dragged.
I didn't think it dragged at all. I think that was the point of the film. The film really came alive to me in that last 45 minutes with the whole relationships and the political stuff coming in. I thought that was the most fascinating bit of the film for me. I would have maybe chopped some of the earlier bits if we wanted to reduce the running time of the film. I just thought that was fantastic, the way that it all came together, and Lewis, what's his name, Robert Downey Jr.'s character, the way he was kind of portrayed towards the end of the film as being quite a villain of the piece. Spoilers there, but I thought that was just brilliantly done. Anyway, scores on the doors. Andy?
8.
Scott?
8.
Emma?
I'm kind of on the fence. I'm going to say 6.
6.
Yeah, fair enough. Absolutely.
And I don't do this very often, but I'm going to give Oppenheimer a 10. I'm going to give it my top marks. So that's a total of 32 divided by 4 gives 8.0 as the Flickering Dreams score, making Oppenheimer a bomb. No, the opposite of a bomb. It's a...
Very clever.